Hello there. Today we're in London and we're in a street called Exmouth Market, famous for cafes and restaurants, just north of Clerkenwell, south of Islington. Very popular with the after work crowd, got lots of interesting little bars there, and popular at the weekends as well. London isn't a place where there's an awful lot of outdoor seating, so when you do get a street which is largely pedestrianised like Exmouth Market is, and the cafes all put their tables and chairs out, it becomes kind of a popular place to sit outside. And that's what I'm doing today. I'm sitting outside a cafe called Sweet. I recommend it. Very nice pastel de natas. I'm having a flat white and I'm having a sketch just because, why not? You're having a seat, you're having a good coffee, so you may as well get out your paper and have a little scribble just for the kind of connection it makes. Trying this new pen again, which I've had for a few weeks now. It's the Tom Studio Lumos pen, which is like it's a duo pen, it's called, which means it's in two halves. The convenientness of that is when you break it into its two parts, they're very small and you can have different nibs in each one, so it's quite a fun little pen to use. I'm becoming quite fond of it. Now, I normally start out a drawing with a pencil sketch. I thought just really for this video I'd try just to go straight in with the Lumos pen here with a kind of an ink line, a felt tip ink line, because I fill these pens with my own kind of colour ink, and that's kind of a risky thing to do. I'm genuinely only doing it for the video, in the sense that if I make a mistake at this stage, if I'm drawing a line and it's wrong, that's really on me. I've got the perspective wrong, or I'm messing up my own drawing in some way. Normally you use a pencil just to give yourself guides, but I'm aware that in the video those pencil guidelines can be very faint and very difficult to see. And to be honest, the reason you draw them specifically is so they're faint and difficult to see, so they don't become part of the final drawing. You don't have to rub anything out. But for those of you who are starting out on your journey into urban sketching, I thought it might be convenient for you to see this stage done, as it were, for real, live, with no guidelines, with no vanishing points, with no sort of security net, just jumping straight in with an ink line, just to kind of give that sense of the honesty of what this feels like to do. Now, you've seen I've chosen this tan paper. I do heavily suggest that people think about tonal paper which responds to the colour of the space you're in, just because it gives you that sense of immediacy, that sense of having started without even trying to. It also allows you to use white, which is such a powerful colour, if you can call it a colour, in drawing. There's so many things which benefit from being highlighted in white, that having a tonal paper really allows for that, especially of course when you're using these kinds of acrylic paint pens, which have such a high opacity, meaning sort of a solidity to their colour that can really kind of do a wonderful job. So at this point I've been through the blue ink guideline, which I intend to almost completely replace with colour over the top, and now I'm going in with the Arrtx acrylic paint pens in order to pick out the highlight colours, pick out the kind of qualities of the space. A drawing like this is very exploratory, in the sense that literally it's a coffee and a drawer. I'm not taking it particularly seriously. I'm not doing it as a job. I'm not doing it because I'm told to. I'm doing it for a sense of relaxation. So therefore I'm allowing myself to kind of explore the drawing rather than just create something. I'm not trying to be particularly successful. Doesn't make sense, does it? But I'm not trying to show a particular skill or have a particular quality to the drawing. I'm literally just trying different things out, having fun with different pens. You'll see the range of pens to the side here. I've dragged them all out my bag just so they're a bit more convenient to immediately grab onto, just so I can pick up things and throw them down and kind of play with the drawing a bit. Here you see me using the Winsor & Newton watercolour brush pens. I really love these pens. I wish they came in more variation of colours. They're such a weirdly juicy, wet ink in a watercolour style. They're ideal for that kind of big impact kind of marks you want to make. Now, I guess it would be possible to spend quite a lot of money if you were buying a whole load of pens. Not something I'd recommend, really. I think it's really quite useful. Find yourself a shop somewhere online, perhaps, where you can just buy 1 or 2 pens just so you can try things out. They're very personal, how they feel in the hand, the kind of marks they make, how the nibs work. I've had pens which I dearly love, which, you know, I lend them out to somebody else and they don't get on with them at all. We all find things that work for us. That's the story here, I think. Now, this is actually a relatively grey day, one of those Tupperware sky days, but I don't really have a Tupperware sky blue. So I'm going in with an intense blue, and my intention sort of fade it back. First I do it with an alcohol marker, and then I go back in with some white acrylic paint pen, just to really push that blue back. But to be frank, I mean, I wouldn't be afraid to keep the intensity of the blue. I don't mind, in inverted commas, lying about the weather and saying to people it's a happy day. I think that's all part of the joy of a sketch, as opposed to the sort of imprisonment you have when you take a photograph, unless you're prepared to go into Photoshop for 2 hours and brighten everything up. That sense of I can draw how I feel about the view rather than draw exactly what the view is. I don't have to be honest about it. One of the most famous urban sketchers is a man called Ian Fennelly. You will have seen his work if you've looked at urban sketching on YouTube. He has a famous quote, a kind of little giggly quote he makes, which is, no, I don't count windows, which is a response to a question about how detailed and how dedicated he is to the accuracy of the view. And his point being, he's not going to do a view and say, well, because there's 3 windows along and they've got 5 panes of glass in them and the mullions are this thick, I am required to mimic that. I am required to capture that same detail in my view. I mean, literally, he laughs and says, well, no, obviously I don't do that, because that's not fun. You know, that's not part of the joy of the sketch, is it? To sort of feel so trapped. If you're going to work from a photograph and literally kind of trace the photograph, then you feel as if you have a requirement to be accurate to it. Whereas if you're in the space, it doesn't seem relevant so much to be accurate to the space. What you're trying to be is accurate to the feeling. You're representing what it is to be there rather than what it is to trace a photograph. So when you're actually in the space, the last thing you're thinking about is how many windows there are and how many mullions there are. What you're thinking about is the noise and whether you want another coffee or not, and the cold of the seat and the kind of the people talking to you, and you're feeling that sense of connection, the kind of mindfulness side of it, the sense of being there, and super sort of hyper aware because of the fact you're drawing it. When you're drawing a thing, it becomes part of your experience in a way that's very difficult to achieve in any other method, I'm sure. There's something truly connecting about drawing a space that you're in. And that's, of course, the essence of what urban sketch is. It's that sense of connection to place through the sketching, through the representation. And the character you bring to the drawing is as much about how you feel and your own character, who you are. It's as much about that than it is about what the space is about, what the space looks like, for sure. This is why I recommend sort of plein air outdoor urban sketching so heavily. Firstly, you don't have to be so accurate as when you're using a photograph or a photographic reference. And secondly, you can express yourself rather than just draw. It's more human, it's not such an illustration type of act. It's a creative act. Here you see me using some Tombow pens just to kind of hit back on some of the intensity of the colour. When you're using pens in a way, as opposed to watercolours, with a watercolour you can blend colours together and create a sort of a third mix, a third colour from 2 colours. You can tone them back, you can brighten them up, and so you can become more accurate about the colour you initially lay down. When you're using pens, you don't really have that ability to premix the colour. What you're going to do is lay down a colour and then lay another colour over the top. And that takes a little bit of experience with the pen, because when you first lay down the colour, your first thought is, oh God, that's too bright, or that's too whatever, that's too intense. And so you're going to have to trust the fact that you're going to come back to that same layer of colour, apply another sort of tone or colour over the top, and that's going to knock it back or cool it down or push it into the place you want it to be. Part of this process is about feeling sort of reassured that it's all going to be okay, and to keep drawing until it is. That's very much my kind of philosophy of the moment. I say of the moment because there's been different parts in my sketching life where I've drawn differently. You should do, shouldn't you? I mean, it's like if you draw the same way forever, what kind of process is that? How does that feel to just be so locked as a sort of a creative process? It's super important to allow yourself to experiment, because in experimentation comes growth, and by experimenting you have to accept that often an experiment doesn't work out. Often things happen and you think, okay, that's not what I wanted it to look like, and therefore I won't do that in the same way again. But the embracing of, and I use inverted commas here, a mistake. Embracing mistakes is a really important part of sketching, especially sketching live like this, sketching out on the street, because you can't feel sort of confined by the end product. You can't feel trapped by that sense of it has to be just so. Here we're using one of the super fine line white acrylic pens, which is a really useful tool to have in the box. Something which really gives that sort of sharpening. Often what happens in a urban sketch is you go through a process of focus, by which I mean when you're using kind of alcohol markers and the acrylic markers, there's a slight blur that happens, and then when you bring in your fountain pen, you bring in your fine line paint pen, the white pen, that brings a sense of sharpness. So you get this kind of blur and then sharp overlaying it that creates a very interesting effect. Well, here you see the end product. It was a relatively short drawing, 45 minutes or so, enough for the coffee to go cold, and very pleasant time was had. So thank you to Exmouth Market. I'll see you next time.